I'm going to conclude today a series I've been doing about upgrading my relationships. And I'm going to share some stuff with you today, very practical, that all of us can practice and do today to make our relationships even better. Now, I wish there was a button you could press to make every relationship better. There's not. Relationships take time, they take effort, they take work, but they're worth it in the end. Now, I have a dream job I'd like to create. And it's where you could be a chef at a restaurant for a day just to learn how they make your favorite meal. Sometimes because their prices are really expensive, so you think it might be cheaper to do it at home. Otherwise, sometimes isn't it annoying when you have a favorite meal at a restaurant and then they get rid of that menu item? And it's the worst when you order it and then they're like, sorry, they don't have it. So I would like that job. So I would like to just be able to show up at the place, be the chef. Now, I have a couple different places I would go, and I could probably just talk all day about my list. Now, one place I would love to learn is how they make the steaks so good at Morton's. I don't know how they do it, but they are delicious. Now, if steak's not your thing, at the end of the meal, they have a molten chocolate lava cake that is delicious. And it looks like cake. And you cut into it, and chocolate just oozes out. And you're like, how did the melted chocolate get into the cake? Because there's not a hole where they punctured it, but it's in there. And it's so delicious. Or maybe this next one. Applebee's has a New Orleans skillet. It's delicious. And I don't know if they have it anymore because I went to one Applebee's and it was gone. But it's so good when it comes sizzling out there, this meal that, oh, it's good. Or this next one. Broccoli cheddar soup. Not out of a can, but go to Panera where they bring it in a nice big bowl and a big thing of bread. And there you are enjoying the soup, wondering how they did it. Because I grew up on Campbell's. Campbell's soup is not as good as Panera's soup. And definitely has no broccoli in it. It's just a big thing of cheese that goes... Or this next one. Fajita nachos from Chili's. My favorite. I think they're gone. It's what inspired me for this. They're my favorite. Or any Mexican restaurant, just fajitas. I just love it. Nolan, next slide. There we go. Fajitas. Any Mexican restaurant. I would love to go there. Or maybe to go to McAllister's and learn how they make their sweet tea. Okay, I really know how they do that. A little bit of water, a little bit of tea, and about 10 pounds of sugar. That's how they do their sweet tea there. So we went half cut, and it's still too much. But I would love to learn how they do the different recipes at the different places so I know how. Now, chefs are great because they just have this knack for using time and temperature to create a meal. They know all the physics involved. They know how much time to have the vegetables or the meats or whatever, it's heating up and how much heat and temperature to put on it. So part of it's just like there's a science to it. And then part of it's an art where you're like seasoning and how much you put on the plate and how you make the plate look and everything. There's that art and there's science to it. And some of us are really gifted and we have more of an art and a science ability with foods. Others of us, not so much. Others of us can even burn toast. Even by putting the toaster on the lowest setting, somehow the toast gets burnt. Or somehow, some of us are good at burning water. I've never understood how that happens, but it stinks when it does. But there's an art and a science to how chefs approach making the meals that we love so very much. But there's also an art and a science to our relationships. There's a little bit of science in how we approach things, we know we need to do things, but there's also just this finesse that you bring to the relationships where you bring out the very best. But in both those things, for a chef, they know how to use time well. Do you ever do this before you're cooking a meal at home and you're like, you have all these meals, but you get fixated on one item and you start doing that one item and you forget you have all the other things you have to do too, and you get that one item done and you're like, wait a minute, I didn't do all this other stuff. But chefs have this knack for, okay, I have to do this, and this. And they're like, here, okay, here, okay, here, okay, here. And then they're running back to here. And you ever watch those cooking shows where the chefs, they're going crazy because you're doing all these things so they finish all at the same time. Because our favorite part about going to a restaurant is when they bring the plate of food out to us and it's warm. Or a lot of times hot. So much so that they're like, don't touch the plate. The plate will burn you. Do you ever say that at home? No, we usually don't. But there's something about how we approach time in our relationships that has a big impact on the relationship. Now, we all have the same thing with time. 24 hours. Anybody have more than 24 hours? Because if you do, teach me your secrets. But all of us have the exact same amount of time every day. 24 hours. We can't get more. We can sure waste it. We can spend it. We can invest it. We can use our time differently, but we all have the same amount of time. Every one of us. 24 hours a day. The writer of Ecclesiastes felt like, hey, there's a time for everything. There's a time for the sun to rise, a time for the sun to set. There's a time to live, there's a time to die. There's a time to buy, there's a time to sell. There's a time for everything. And we each have different demands on our time. We use time differently. For some of you, you're retired. So your time is totally different than how my time is used. Because I have different demands on my time than you do. We all use it differently. All of us have learned that we don't get redos on how we use our time. Now, the great philosopher Cher once saying, if I could turn back time. Now, all of us wish we had a DeLorean that would go 88 and we could go back in time to fix some things that we've done before. We wish we could do that. Has anybody ever here blown it before? And wished, I wish I could get those words back. Because it's like your cartoon character and you can still see the words floating to the ears of the other person. And you're thinking, come back. Come back. I need you back here. And you can't, can we? Or we made a choice, a decision that pushed our life in one direction. And we're like, man, I wish I could step back and I wish I could redo that and fix that. We can't. We can't do redos necessarily. Time goes faster than we realize. Sometimes days feel long, but years are very short. Sometimes when we start a new friendship, it's exciting and it's passionate, but we realize it's the time that makes the relationship so great. Because over time, as you get to know that person, a deep connection forms. Advertisers know this. Because advertisers are skilled. Because think about all the car advertisements you see every day. How many times do you buy a new car based on the advertisement that you see? You would like to, wouldn't you? And I just say that because I found out I have a leak in one of the seals on my van, so it makes the back end wet when it rains. And I noticed that today. So it's frustrating. So I'm like, a new car would be awesome. And so then I think back to a couple weeks ago to that Porsche. Now that would be awesome, but not practical. I'm still trying to subtly get that in my wife's head that I just need that, but it's not going to happen. I know that, but the reality is it would be fun to drive. But advertisers are skilled at this because they want to get you on two ways. One, they want to get you on the impulse. Oh, you want that. Oh, you need that. I mean, hey, last Christmas I was like, hey, I guess for Christmas I should just go buy my wife and I a brand new truck and a brand new car and see which one she wants, and I'll take the other one because that's what the advertisers say is going to happen. We're going to show up with 2 brand new trucks on the parking lot. They never talk about the payments that you have to make after that, but that's all. Advertisers want you to buy on the impulse, but Car advertisers know this. They keep advertising and advertising and advertising to get you to want to come back later. They want that brand to be on your mind. Because they want both sides of things, the impulse and over time. Our relationships are like that. They're exciting at the beginning, but the real depth of the relationship happens over time. That's when deep bonds form, is over time. Just as time goes on. Now, there's a relational element. There's times a relational element. I mean, think about all those moments when you read the gospel about Jesus traveling with his team. All the time that they had. Because we get the snapshots of Jesus went here and he taught this. But then you see another side to it of the disciples being like, a little bit later, time goes by and they're like, what did you mean by that? They had that time. Or they just had the time going between events. As Jesus is traveling to here, they're just talking and they're interacting from here to here to here as they're traveling. There's that time that's going by as they're there together. Or think about the purposeful time Jesus spent when he was just, okay, I've had a busy day, I'm ministering to a lot of people, but I need to spend time with Father God. So he steps back and he gets away and he just prays and cries out and talks to God. Time. Or think about this, the mentorship of Paul with John Mark. Because it starts, and we see this in Acts chapter 12, verse 25. When Barnabas and Saul had finished their mission, they returned from Jerusalem, taking with them John, also called Mark. This is around AD 44. This is all happening. They're like, Mark, come with us. Join the team. Be a part of what we're going to do. So then, a few years later, 46 to 48 AD, they go on Paul's very first missionary journey. And John Mark goes traveling with them, but he quits midway through the journey. Something came up, he didn't enjoy it, there was persecution, something he didn't agree with, something happened, we don't know the details per se, but he just decides, I'm out of here. And so, about 5 or 6 years later, in AD 50, Paul and Barnabas start planning their next missionary trip. And this is what happens, Acts 15:36. Sometime later, Paul said to Barnabas, let us go back and visit the believers in all the towns where we preach the word of the Lord and see how they are doing. Barnabas wanted to take John, also called Mark, with them, but Paul did not think it wise to take him because he had deserted them in Pamphylia and had not continued with them in the work. They had such a sharp disagreement that they parted company. Barnabas took Mark and sailed to Cyprus, but Paul chose Silas and left, commended by the believers to the grace of the Lord. He went through Syria and Cilicia, strengthening the churches. I mean, some big tension here. So much so that the team breaks up. It's like, okay, Barnabas, you go that way. I'm going this way because I'm not dealing with him. I mean, there was some kind of hurt, some kind of frustration, something that really caused tension to form between Mark and Paul. And Paul's just like, I can't trust him to be with me on this mission. Now, on a positive side, now there's two people going out and proclaiming the gospel instead of one team. There's now two. Now, that is a positive that came of all this, but there's some kind of tension that is forming there. But yet, 17 years later, Paul, writing to Timothy, says this in 2 Timothy 4:11, Luke alone is with me. Get Mark. Go get Mark and bring him with you. He is very useful for me in ministry. Something in that 17 years of time changed. Something in that time, in their relationship, changed. At some point, Mark and Paul reconciled. At some point, they started working together. Paul was able to invest in Mark's life. Mark was able to prove himself and work in ministry alongside Paul, so much so that as you're approaching the end of Paul's life, he's like, I want Mark here with me. I need him here. He is beneficial. Time was a big element in that. I need him here. Because there's things that happen when we do things over time. One is when we make an investment over time, it leads to a payoff. An investment over time. Day in and day out, I'm pouring in. Day in and day out, I'm working with you. Day in and day out, I'm getting to know who you are. I'm putting an investment in who you are. At some point, that was able to take place where Paul's able to turn around and invest in Mark's life over time. And then there was so much so that at the end, it becomes a payoff. He's like, he's beneficial to me. I need him here. He's my partner. I need his effort. I need his energy. I need everything he can do. He's beneficial to me. That investment over time. It makes a permanent imprint on a soul. That investment over time. So take advantage of each opportunity. Be purposeful. Be aware. Be proactive. Be love. Be real. Be an example. But keep investing over time so you get the payoff. I mean, we do that with our finances. We keep investing over time. We keep putting money in the 401k. We put money in the savings account. We do that because the payoff's at the end. But it's something we can all do in our relationships with people. We just keep investing in them. Or we do time over time. When we do time over time, it creates history. Now, we're still talking about Paul and Mark, history. But time matters. There's an ever-decreasing amount of opportunity that we have with each other. One moment will be the last moment we have to interact with somebody. That's just a reality. At some point, somebody moves away. At some point, they get a different job and they go to a different location. At some point, something changes. We have an ever-decreasing amount of opportunities to be around each other. Time is easy to waste, but it's hard to get back. So think about this. If we visualize the time we have remaining, it helps prioritize what matters. Paul realized, I don't have a lot of time left. Send Mark here. Timothy, you come also. Because we're creating history together. So I'm going to spend time with you over time while I can. Because the less time we have, the more seriously we take the moments. You ever notice this? You go on vacation? You're on vacation. What happens? You get there when you first arrive on vacation, you know, hey, I have a week here. So the first couple days, you're like all invested in what goes on. You're like going crazy. You're going to all the sites. You're doing everything that you can. You're having a great time. About midway through the trip, you're like, I'm tired. I'm on vacation. I'm going to need a vacation from my vacation. And so you're like, okay, I'm going to just kind of chill in the middle of the vacation. But then all of a sudden when you realize, hey, there's only a few days left before we fly home or drive home or travel home or do whatever, I'm probably never going to get back here again. All of a sudden, you go crazy. A few years ago, my crew of 5, we went to Orlando. And our last day there ended up being like an 18-hour day, a marathon, because we're like, we're going to squeeze everything remaining of our trip into these last few hours, to the point where finally at about 11 o'clock that night, we're like, well, I guess we need to head home now. And then me just decided, why stay at a hotel? Let's just drive all the way back to Illinois together. They all slept. I drove the entire way home after however many hours we were there. But it's part of our family history, because we spent time over time together. It takes a long time. It takes time over time to make history worth repeating. Longevity is your friend in meaningful relationships. But isn't it awesome how when you have time over time, you start having history together, how neat it is because you have so many different eras of your life to talk about? You're just like, hey, remember when we did this? Or remember when this happened? Or remember this, that depth that happens in relationships. We can all do this. Or maybe it's love over time. This matters the most because it expresses worth. Because when you have love over time, it's remembered as he or she loved me. Because as time's going by, you're like, the one thing I know is when I show up and I see him or I see her, that I will experience love. They might be frustrated with me, they might be aggravated with me, or it might be awkward in a moment, but I know that I'm worth something to them because over time they have shown me great love. I'm worth something. That's what it communicates. I can prove my love by showing up. I can prove my love by being fully present in the moment. I can prove my love by getting to know the other person. Hey, you're worth something. I love you, so I'm going to take time to get to know who you are. I'm going to discover and rediscover the things that make you unique. I'm going to learn how you're wired. I mean, that's Paul with Mark. He's like, he's beneficial to me in ministry. He is, his gifts and his talents and his abilities work with what I'm trying to do and accomplish. He realized he had worth. Now, early on, when they hadn't had as much time, he didn't see that. Over time, he realized his worth as he got to know him. Prove your love by never running away. Don't disengage emotionally. Don't punish relationally when correcting behavior. At some point, they reconciled, which is awesome to think about. Healthy relationships communicate God's unconditional love and how priceless and irreplaceable each person is to God. Or maybe it's not that. Maybe it's words over time. As I give my words over time, it gives direction to a person. They know as they come and talk to me, their words over time guide and instruct me and direct me how to behave, what to do, how to act, how to process the situation. It gives me direction. So I need to make sure that I'm careful, that I weigh carefully what I say. Because if my words over time are giving direction, I can direct somebody in a great way, or I can misdirect them and do great harm if I'm not careful with those words out of time. I learned that this week. My daughter started playing softball, has never played any type of baseball, softball, t-ball, you name it, at all ever before. So this week was her first week to learn how to put a glove on. It was her first week to learn how to toss a ball. It was her first time to learn that there's a first base, second base, third base, home plate, and how to run around them. So she's learning all those. And so we're in the backyard, and we're just tossing the softball back and forth to each other. And at first, she's like throwing it, and it goes about 2 feet, and it just drops, and then kind of rolls to me. And so I'm like getting a little frustrated because I'm just like, throw the ball! And at some point, I was just like not thinking, I just said, you're throwing like a girl. She is a girl. And then I thought, that is the worst thing ever to communicate to her. Because as those words are coming out of my mouth, her shoulders deflated. Because that came to her as an insult. And in that moment, I wasn't thinking, you're throwing weak like a girl, you know. I'm thinking, I don't know what I was thinking, but I knew I was in trouble. Because my words in that moment were giving her direction. And so she throws it that next time. And it just kind of flopped, and it was the worst throw that she threw the whole time. And I'm like, I stepped back. I was like, no, I don't want her to think being a girl is less. So as I'm working with her, I'm like, no, throw harder. And throw harder. And then I'm like, no, now you're throwing like a girl, because she's like throwing the ball at me mad. But then the ball's like flying to me, and then it's having some heat to it when it finally connects with my glove, and she's throwing a little bit harder. And I'm just like, no, now you're throwing like a girl, because I flipped it around instead of it being an insult. Like now you're throwing better than your brothers. You're throwing better than a boy. So I changed that around. But I realized how powerful words are. Not even thinking. Our words give direction to people. So select words over time can impact someone's direction in life. Words have weight, especially when you're disappointed or angry or frustrated, or when you just don't want to be honest. Words have weight to them. Compare the impact of saying to someone, "You are worthless," or "I believe in you." I had a student one time that I was talking to, and I was just sitting at a table in a cafe area, and we're just talking. And I just told her, I go, "Danielle, you are priceless and irreplaceable. You matter." And we were talking about something. I don't remember what the situation was anymore, but I just kind of made that statement. "I'm glad you're here. You matter. Your life is valuable and important." And she got home, and that next week, her dad had done the opposite and was just getting on to her about something, and it made her feel worthless. And then she just turned around and said to her dad, "Why can't you be like Pastor Mark? Why can't you just say, 'I mean something'?" It changed their whole dynamic of the relationship, because her dad realized how he was talking to her and what he was saying, how that impacted her heart and her life. Our words matter. Or maybe it's just doing life over time. It's doing life together. Because it's when we do life together that a family bond forms. And we realize this just as a church family. As we're doing life together, we bond with one another, and then we can say, we're a church family. Because we're doing life together over time. That's what builds things. It's just time builds great relationships. We can't shortchange that. We just spend the time together. And then it makes things awesome. And something all of us can do. We just take the time with one another. I love how Paul and Mark took the time to work things out. I wish there was some account of whatever happened with Paul and Barnabas. I wish there was something that showed what happened in that relationship. I suspect at some point it reconciled. We just don't have any record of it. But I wish we knew. I wish we could hear what happened. But it's awesome, the relationship that John, Mark, and Paul developed over time. So make the most of the time with the people that you have in your life. Make the most of it. Invest time in your relationships, and then see what God will do in those relationships.